I chose Hostiles as a movie to research and watch because I'm fairly interested with the way the modern Western interacts with the Westerns of old.
Hell or High Water.
I think my favorite Western is Johnny Guitar, just because it shows strong female characters. It's mostly just an argument between two female characters.
I think Little Big Man is one of those movies that goes against the system.
The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, because I just felt like it was so much more unique than the other Western films we've seen.
I really think it has to be Stagecoach because it set in motion and created so many of the themes and ideas that so many other films in the genre have taken and ran with.
Westerns have always been like the typical like American movie. Like there are like America goes through like the genres, like, you know, like the big blockbuster and everything, but everything always comes back to the Western. Because the Western was the American dream of like going out west and settling and like having just taking control of your life.
Well, the one theme that really stuck out to me is how, the Western is our country's like folklore. The UK has, the knights of the Round Table and King Arthur. Even though it's fictional and not all of it is true, the modern Western reflects times in our history. Especially with the older films. McCarthyism. Terrorism, banking crisis. I mean, when you really look at it, these films are about things that happened and are happening again in our culture, and it's really interesting viewing it that way, and not just oh, they have guns and they're shooting at each other. There's themes underneath that you really can explore and dive into if you want to.
In the early days, it was important that Americans saw these Westerns and thought, wow, we Americans are really great, whether it was the fact that it was during the Great Depression and so people needed something to cheer them up, or during wartime when we needed people to be proud in their country, and people were. But then I think in the 50s and 60s, as we moved into wars that were a bit more controversial, and policies that were a bit more controversial in this country, that people look back on Western times and are thinking, maybe what we've seen in film, maybe that wasn't what all it was cracked up to be.
When I'm watching a Western, I look for, they have like the typical violence, like the gunfights and such, but I also look for something that's has a bit more of a open-minded view, especially because so many Westerns are so negative towards Native Americans, they're so negative towards women. I try to look for ones that have more open points of view.
Of course, there's Westerns that heavily tackle our conquering of the frontier, as it were, and I think some definitely show American exceptionalism, and I think those are positives that some Westerns try to show, but I also think it's equally important that certain Westerns show negatives, like American treatment of Native Americans in those times of settlement and war. And I think seeing those things reflected on the screen in the modern day is vitally important, so as we don't forget that there are some very positive things in our nation's past, but also some very negative things that we have to grapple with.
For Hell or High Water, I have to say that it was just the fact that it was a modern take on a Western film. In the movie, you don't really see like a comparison between like feminine and masculine. It's just a lot of masculinity happening in the movie. Of course, when his partner got shot, you would think that like you would be upset, and that scene shows that he has like emotion, because initially you don't think that he has any emotion towards his partner, and because he makes all these jokes and like slurs and stuff like that, and you think that their relationship is like not so good, but for them it works. For them, it's like they kind of bounce off each other, and that's like the typical like bro like relationship you get in movies with guys, but to see like when his partner was shot and like he became so upset, you see that vulnerability, and that's a good side, but it sort of turns back to like masculine because he had to like kind of avenge his death and kind of like he had to kill the person who shot him.
Hostiles took a lot from The Searchers and kind of mixed around with it and really went into certain different directions that I really admired. Right off the bat, you really get the sense that they're similar. The film Hostiles, made in 2017, actually starts out with a Comanche raid on a family home, and it's really violent, and it really reflects the one that we don't see the entire raid in The Searchers. That event really resounds through the rest of the film. The next similarity is the character of Captain Joseph Blocker, who's Christian Bale's character, who actually resembles John Wayne's character as Ethan in multiple ways. I mean, he's really aggressive against the Indians, and he has a long history with them, and you could tell he's really battled them. Throughout the film, he's forced to interact with the Indians in a way that John Wayne was never forced to. John Wayne was focused on obtaining his target of finding his niece, and instead Christian Bale's character went the other way. He had to take these people, the Cheyenne tribe, the Elder Man, to their homeland, and he becomes less hardened throughout the film.
I think Little Big Man is one of those movies that goes against the system. It has some comedy in it, but it goes against all the myths of the Western, and I really enjoy it. It is kind of long too, but Dustin Hoffman character, I think he breaks with a lot of the myths of this Western hero. Since the beginning, he gets adopted by the Native Americans. He's a white boy, and he gets adopted by the Native Americans. He's raised like them, He's not completely white, but he's not completely Native American. He's in the middle, I think he learns a lot. When he gets adopted, he learns their way, but once he rebels, he's white, and he goes with, the civilized people. He also learns, and he learns to read and write, and I think his character is a change of how people is not, like you're just white, or just Native American, or no, you're just Hispanic, you can be all of them, and I think that's I feel like a connection with him too, and that's what I like about Dustin Hoffman's character.
Johnny Guitar is absolutely ridiculous, but it's an interesting kind of ridiculous. It's a different kind of ridiculous that the Western hasn't seen before.
So what stood out to me was that Johnny Guitar, he was actually, you would think that he was supposed to be the main character of the entire movie, but it was funny because he just played in parts of it. Like, he was in it, but the two women were fighting against each other, which you don't ever really see in the Westerns. It's usually men against men, and they kind of put the women in that role, I feel like, purposely.
When the main character, Vienna, is standing on a balcony in front of her casino, and she's just standing there up above everyone else, and she seems so powerful and so strong. And that's just like something that's like really iconic to me, because now when I think of a strong woman, I think of several different things, several different movie characters, but she is now one of those characters that I think of.
She was just a badass, like, to say the least. Like, she completely owned all the men, and they all, I feel like, respected her in the way that you don't really see in a lot of the other Western movies. Yeah, she's wearing like kind of like a cowboy shirt with the high button-up pants and the belt, and you can kind of just tell like she's the boss around the town. Overall, I thought that I was definitely Team Vienna more than I was Team Emma, because she She just seemed crazy. I don't know.
I can think of like a strong moment from like High Noon when Amy picks up the gun and realizes she needs to do something. Like that's a strong moment that I really enjoy.
At first, she didn't want her husband to fight, and she knew that she wanted to go. She wanted to start her new life, and then once her husband decided that he was going to go back and fight, she was like against it, ready to leave him, and then she decided, you know what, like I need to have courage too and be there for my husband. You know, she also got advice from Mrs. Ramirez and said, you know, if that were my man, I would go with him too. So I feel like that kind of opened her eyes and gave her a reason to go back and fight, and she stepped up and helped him ultimately win the battle at the end. I think that's kind of iconic in a way. Like I said, you don't normally see that in the Western because it's always the men, and the women are usually like very timid about their partners fighting and, you know, getting into a confrontation, but these women stepped up and were strong and basically just showed every single man around them that they're awesome and they can fight for themselves. They don't need anyone behind them.